Welcome back. So in our last segment, we looked at query by example, how we can create essentially, a question that we're going to send to the database to return some of the data within the database. And so what we're going to talk about in this segment is how we can add in specific criteria or a single criterion to kind of help filter out the data that we want to request even more. So when we talk about having our query meet specific criteria, right, we're essentially just talking about having it meet a specific condition, right? Whether something is, equal to something, whether a value is greater than a specific value, and things like that. Right? So we have our comparison operators, the basic ones that we're used to in arithmetic, right? Equal, greater or less than, and then greater than or equal to, and less than or equal to. And then we also have is not equal to. And so when we're creating our query, we can create a specific criterion, or if we're going to set up multiple, we're going to specify multiple criteria, and when we run it, it's gonna check that condition automatically and then return the results that meet that specific criteria. That's the condition that we're setting. So we can also check that criteria in a different way, but I'll get to that here in a second. But first, let me open up Access, and so I'm going to create my query. So there's our query form. I'm going to use the task master list table. There it is. And so I'm going to add in a few different columns from this table. Task ID, category. So when you're creating your query, the order of the columns don't matter. The order that you select down here in the grid, that's the order that is going to be displayed. So you don't have to return the data in the order that is entered within the table. You can kind of rearrange that to meet your needs. You can do a lot of customizing with databases. So task ID, category ID, description, and then I'm going to throw in estimate as well, because we'll come back to that one afterwards. So I have my 4 columns for our table, and I'm going to return these fields when I query the database. So I'm going to return these 4 fields from the task master list table. And now let's look at adding in some criteria. So in the category ID right there, so we can see the criteria row. So we can set criteria for each attribute, each column, if we would like. So let's start off with just one, right? So for category ID, I'm going to put in database. And so you'll notice when I hit enter or move to a different cell, it automatically added quotes to it. And that's because the values within category ID within that column are what we refer to as strings. They're just characters, letters. And so when I put in database for the criteria, when I put in letters, it's going to automatically add in those quotes for me because it is a string. And so I also want to make note of the fact that case does not matter when you're adding in criteria, meaning that having database written like that will also catch database if it's entered like that, or if it's all caps, or it doesn't matter. It's case insensitive. So that's a good thing. So now I've set my criteria. We're only going to return the results that have database set for category ID. So let's run this and take a look. And so there we have it. So there it returned our 5 records that have a category ID of database. So if I go back to the design view, right, if I want to check to make sure that it is working correctly, I'll remove the criteria, run it again, and there's all my records. There's those 5 that I just filtered for. But that's setting our criteria, setting our condition, right? So the other way that we can do that is through what we refer to as parameter, meaning that if we don't want to check the criteria as soon as we run the query automatically, we can have the database prompt us to enter in the criteria. So if we're running the query and we might want to check different types of criteria, we can do that. So we're going to use a bracket, and then whatever we put inside the bracket is going to be a prompt that's going to pop up on the screen telling us what to do. So we'll say enter category, closing the bracket, right? And so this is going to set the parameter. So now when I run this, instead of it filtering automatically, now it's going to say enter in the category that you want to search for, that you want for your criteria. So if I put in database again, hit OK, it's going to return the same results, right? So instead of doing the condition, the criteria, as soon as I run the query, it's going to prompt me. So this allows me to enter in different criteria for that column whenever I run the query. So that's super helpful as well. So the last thing I want to mention is our different conditions, right? So I added in the estimate column here from this table, and so here in my criteria I can set a condition, and remember those conditions were equal, greater than, less than, all sorts of that good stuff, right? All of those conditions. So the way that's going to look is we're going to have a condition here, and we're going to say, if the value is greater than or equal to 150, right? And so now when I run this, it's going to return all the records in the database that have an estimate that's greater or equal to 150. So we can see our results do in fact have nothing less than 150. So that's using our conditions within our criteria. All right, so now let's move on to compound criteria. Okay, so when we're talking about compound criteria, what we mean is that we're just basically having more than one condition in our query. And so there's a couple different ways that we can create compound criteria. And so we can either have a condition and another condition, or we can look for a condition or another condition. And so if we're using the AND method, right, what we're saying is that both conditions need to be true and only return the results of both conditions being true. With the OR method, right, only one of them has to be true. Either this condition has to be true or this condition has to be true and return the results of one or the other. So we're going to get a lot more results with the OR method. So let's kind of take a look at that. So if I come back to my design view here, so I have my estimate here that I just entered of having greater than or equal to $150 for our estimate, right? When I run this, I get all these different conditions, all these different records, right? And none of them are, below 150 because of that condition. So if I want to use the AND criteria, all I need to do is just put my other condition on the same criteria row. So kind of going back to the example that we used before, for our category ID, if I type in database here, right, now what I'm saying is only give me the results of the category ID being equal to database and the estimates that are greater or equal to 150. So when I run this, right, I'm only getting 4 results. If you remember back to when we ran just the database query, I had 5 results, right? But now I'm saying category being database and estimate being greater than or equal to 150. So there's only 4 records that meet that condition. So if I come back and I change this and I put it on the OR line, now I'm using the other method. I'm saying give me the results of all the estimates that are greater than or equal to 150, or give me the results of the category ID that are equal to database. So when I run this, now I'm getting a lot more results, right? There's all of my database category IDs, and then all of my estimates that are greater than or equal to 150. But if you look right here, right, so this estimate is less than 150, but it's returning that result because the category ID is equal to database, right? So we're saying one or the other. So it's going to return more results because of that. So that's our compound criteria. We're kind of using 2 different methods, and or method. And both conditions need to be true. With the OR, only one of them needs to be true. Yep, here's another example. Yep, same, the estimate, but in this case they're using, hour for the per taskmaster list. And then OR, again, using that OR row within the design view. So again, all using the graphical user interface, right? If we want to look at the SQL code, I'll just show you that real quick, right? So here is our OR method. Oops. If I go to SQL, so we're selecting these columns from this table, and then we're specifying our conditions. The estimate is greater than or equal to 50, or our category ID is equal to database. Changing this back to and. Run this one more time. Go to our SQL view. Now we can see that keyword and right there. Now we're saying both needs to be true. All right, so there is our compound criteria, utilizing more than one condition with the method of either and or, right? And really just kind of helping us fine-tune our query so that we can return a very specific set of results depending on what we're looking for. So, more about our query by example. I hope this has been useful for you guys, and we'll see you in the next segment.